Welcome to the latest episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. This is episode 213, Seafood and Sustainability, What You Should Know. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Real World Nutrition Podcast. I'm Shelley Rael, registered dietitian nutritionist, and in last week's episode, I talked about seafood myths and misinformation, things like mercury and whether you truly need to be concerned about mercury in the fish that you choose, frozen versus fresh seafood, farm versus wild seafood. And today I'm wrapping up this two-part seafood series by focusing on sustainability. Now this word sustainability gets thrown around a lot, but it's not always clear what it means. So here are some questions that I get. People will ask me, is farmed fish bad for the environment? Should I buy only wild-caught seafood? What about overfishing? And are those eco-labels actually meaningful? Because I do talk a lot about those front of the package labels and whether or not they are meaningful. So this is a good question that people ask. People don't always know if the labels are meaningful or not. So I will address that in today's episode. So I'm also going to address what sustainability means in the context of seafood and how you can make informed choices without overthinking it. Okay, so first, what sustainability means. When it comes to seafood, sustainability means balancing three things: the environment, the economy, and the people involved. So it's about making sure that seafood can be produced and consumed now and in the future without depleting fish populations, without damaging ecosystems, and without harming communities that rely on fishing for their livelihoods. So there are two main sources of seafood, wild caught and farmed. And both can be sustainable and both can be unsustainable. It really depends entirely on how they're managed. Now, for wild caught seafood, sustainability means harvesting fish at levels that allow populations to replenish naturally. So that means not overfishing, so there's not enough fish to keep the population of seafood going. And for farm seafood, it means raising fish responsibly, managing waste, managing the feed, and minimizing disease so there's not an environmental impact or there's minimal environmental impact. So the key point here is sustainability isn't a one-size-fits-all label. Welcome to nutrition where one-size-fits-all doesn't exist. So sustainability is a process that depends on practices, not just marketing. So let's talk about some of these labels, certifications, and what they really mean. Now, if you've ever stood at the seafood counter and noticed labels like MSC certified or ASC certified, you're not alone. And heck, you might not have ever even noticed these certifications. Now, these certification programs are there to help consumers identify sustainable options, but they can be confusing. So here are the main ones to know. The MSC is the Marine Stewardship Council, and this focuses on wild-caught fish and ensures that they come from well-managed fisheries. So that's the MSC, or the Marine Stewardship Council. And then there's the ASC, the Aquaculture Stewardship Council. So this one applies to farmed fish and certifies responsible aquaculture practices. So Aquaculture Stewardship Council, or the ASC. And then there's BAP, that's Best Aquaculture Practices. And this covers environmental and social responsibility for farmed seafood. Now, I have a link in the show notes to the blog I wrote on this, and so there's more about that in that blog post and links to those various certification websites. Now, Like with many things, these certifications aren't perfect, but they are a good starting point. This is where, we're able to have some showing that there is some level of oversight and accountability that exists. Now, you also might see some general claims like sustainably sourced or responsibly caught. And these phrases are not regulated, so they don't necessarily guarantee sustainability. So when possible, look for those third-party certifications instead of that vague language. So the main thing to remember here is there isn't a perfect label. So use them as one tool, not as a guide. So when I say there's not one perfect label, this doesn't guarantee that there's no toxins in the fish, that there's no mercury in the fish. It just is related to how it is caught and farmed. So go back to the last episode where I talked more about the mercury. Now, let's talk a little bit more about wild caught versus farmed. Now, wild caught gets most of the attention when people think of natural or better. And this is not always the case. Now, there can be wild fisheries, and they can be sustainable if they're managed properly. So there can be catch limits, avoiding overfishing, and protecting habitats. However, poor management can lead to overfishing and cause some serious damage like declining populations and ecosystem imbalance. So when I say wild fisheries, this is an area where in the ocean or within the fish's natural habitat, but it is a enclosed situation. So like a giant net where the fisheries are, but in the ocean. So people think of farmed in like tanks, and just think of this as an enclosed, not enclosed, but a very specific space within the ocean. That's the wild fisheries. So their fish are in their natural habitat. It's just in a protected environment, so to speak. Now, farmed fish, or what we call aquaculture, can actually reduce pressure on the wild populations. So when done responsibly, aquaculture can be efficient and environmentally friendly. Modern aquaculture uses controlled systems that minimize pollution and improve feed efficiency. And some farms even recycle water or use plant-based feeds to reduce the environmental footprint. The challenge is that not all aquaculture is managed equally. Regulations vary by country. Farm fish from the US, Canada, and Norway, and parts of Europe typically follow stricter standards than those from other regions around the world. If you're trying to buy responsibly, check the country of origin. Now, it doesn't mean it has to come from the United States or Canada, but take a look at the country of origin, and that could be a cue to gauge quality and regulation. Now, how can we choose and eat seafood sustainably? So let's talk about what you can actually do. So there are a few realistic ways to eat seafood more sustainably. So first up, eat a variety of species. Relying on the same few types like salmon, shrimp, and tuna can increase pressure on those fisheries. So trying different species spreads demand more evenly. Next up, buy in season if possible. Seasonal availability can influence sustainability and cost. So you can ask your local fishmonger if you have one. That's the fish equivalent of your butcher, or at the grocery store ask them if there are certain fish that are in season. If you've ever had the opportunity to visit Alaska, there is definitely a salmon season. So this was something that was a bit surprising to me as well, that there's seasonal fish, but certainly ask about it. Next up, pay attention to sourcing. Look for the country of origin and third-party certifications when available. So we want to see if there's best practices being going on when we buy our fish. And this is huge. Don't fear frozen. Frozen fish is often just as good as fresh, can help reduce waste by extending shelf life, and as I mentioned in the last episode, sometimes you might find out that your fresh fish was actually previously frozen fish. And then support responsible businesses. So many grocery store chains and seafood companies will publish sustainability policies online. So you can check and it will show which ones prioritize responsible sourcing. So here's the thing. Don't get too wound up about things. Just be aware, make informed decisions because they can have a real impact over time. I find that a lot of people, while they may ask about the fish, we talk more about the sustainability of beef and pork and even poultry. But fish tends to come up sometimes. People will ask me about it, but it doesn't come up that often compared to the other animal protein sources. So let's get this nutrition connection here. So beyond sustainability, seafood is one of the most nutrient-rich foods we have. It provides lean protein. Certain types have omega-3 fats. They have vitamin D. They're a rich source of vitamin D and important minerals like selenium. So from a nutrition standpoint, the benefits of eating seafood regularly are clear. It's clear, and most people don't meet the recommended amount of seafood consumption per week. And that's 6 ounces per week, minimum. So pairing that with your thoughtful choices about sustainability can give you the best of both worlds. So supporting your health and the health of the planet so people in the future can benefit from the seafood. So if your goal is balance, sustainable eating is about, making those steps, not making it an all or nothing perfect. I've got to do it all right, but being aware and making steps towards making that balance. Okay. So with that wraps up this seafood series. So with last week's episode, which is linked in the show notes, if you didn't hear that one, along with today's, that was the 2-part of what counts as seafood, myths and misinformation that surround seafood, and then of course now with the sustainability and how to choose responsibly without guilt or overwhelm. So as I said, you can find links related to the blog post that have those 3 certification programs in there and talks a little bit more about that. And with that, I'm wrapping up this week's episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. Thanks for listening. Take care and bye for now.